And there's the result. You can see it roughly how it's going to lay on top of our actual liquid there. As we had done previously, as always, have we done previously in the liquids 2, go get it, is we want to add a kind of reflective layer to this. Because right now, it is literally a volume. This could be, you know, smoke for all we know. I mean, it's pretty dense, so it's probably not smoke, but nonetheless, we can give it a kind of a visual texture to make it feel like a wet foam. The way we do that is we kind of make fake normals for it. And normals are usually what defines how the light reflects off of a surface. So what we can do is we can take the density here, and we can say VDB combine to reverse it. Or really, I'll save that for a moment. We'll just do a VDB analyze or analysis, and that creates a thing called a gradient. And I've talked about gradients in said lesson, but I'll just say real quick here is that when you have a volume and you have, you know, positive numbers on the inside, and obviously maybe it kind of transitions to 0.5 towards the edges, and then it's 0 on the outside, there's kind of a direction the numbers are going in. It's going from high to low in this direction. And that is essentially an arrow or vector pointing that direction, which is essentially a normal. So if I do a VDB analysis on that, and you can see by default it's doing gradient. So it takes in a scalar, which is the fog, and it outputs a vector, which is this directional thing. I can visualize that, perhaps, with our thing here. And you can see that's what we're getting. We're getting these lines pointing out and away. In fact, they're pointing the wrong way, though. That's why they're all bunched up on the middle. So we need to do a VDB combine, which is what I started to do a minute ago, to flip them backwards. So before the gradient, just multiply all of our values by -1. So now they're just flipping the other way. And now you can very much more easily see this is the center of our volume, and then all of these arrows, all these vectors are pointing outwards. And that's pretty much all we need to do. If we hook that into here now, you'll see we have a density. This needs to be called gradient. Otherwise, we have two density volumes. So now we have density, velocity, and gradient. And because this is such a common task, our shader here actually recognizes and is looking for that gradient volume, should it exist. Obviously, it rendered it without it existing, but should it exist, it will take that and add an extra little bit of sheen on the surface. So let's see, did it do it? Kind of hard to tell. Let's actually kick up that value. So find the basic whitewater and say, actually there isn't any, so reflect intensity is still at 0. So that would have been weird if it was there. So I'm going to go to 2 here, refresh that, and there you go. And now we can see it. See? Very easy to see. So now we have a shine. There's a shine on it. So now all of a sudden it feels more solid. It's not just this, you know, very rough thing. Now there's like a kind of a solidness to it, which is what we would expect for having a whole bunch of bubbles crammed together. The other default should be pretty good. Shadow scale is at 0.5 because we want light to pass through this fairly easily, because again it's bubbles, and bubbles are really just kind of a mostly hollow thing. The density is 1, which should be okay. 2 might be interesting. I'm going to keep it at 1. Looking at the alpha here, this is what I want. I don't want it to be like blown out completely solid. I want it to be just getting solid here and there. So I think that's actually pretty good for our foam. Awesome. Okay, so with the foam done, there were the other 2 kinds of whitewater that we were talking about. So one of them is going to be bubbles, which is going to be the real, much easier one to deal with. So we'll start there. Bubbles is just literally reading the bubbles fork from our whitewater area over here. So let's see. So there's foam, or rather not foam, bubbles. What am I talking about? Bubbles. So take bubbles, put it here, And we'll set up well, actually, we don't want to set up an extra matcher node for this. We want to do you know what, let's do a test one for now. We'll literally call it, we'll have it hooked up to nothing. We probably should have had a test one by now anyway. This will just render the bubbles one here. Now we haven't set up anything regarding the actual bubble sizes, so let's not expect it to look too good at first. But let's see what we got. So change it to the test renderer. Let's see what we get. Guess we should actually put a material on this that makes sense. It's still using the whitewater material shader, which is, of course, you know, not for points, just for volumes. So let's go back to here. Let's make up 2 principled shaders, actually. We're going to need one for our spray as well. So I'm going to call the first one principled shader bubbles, principled shader spray. We may even have these end up being the same. They should both be white, at least. Okay. Yeah. I'm not sure what's going on here. I'm just going to put 1, 1, and 1 there. Very good. And then similarly, I'm going to say these should probably be like halfway transparent. Yeah, it is water after all. I mean, we mostly want it to reflect light, so we're not going to make it completely transparent the way water might actually be. But that should be good enough. So go back to the bubbles, or yes, bubbles here. Change this to the bubbles one, and now let's try to render that again. All right, so now we actually see it. It looks interesting in its own way. This is how some people render the foam anyway. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say, let's keep doing the whitewater foam volume way that we've just been doing. But for the bubbles, let's go find that. Let's change the size of these particles. So I'm going to use an attribute randomize. And let's see, they already have a P scale on them. The P scale that they have will have been determined by the whitewater sim. Let's try to doing the calculation again. Particle fluid. Doing. Houdini's getting crazier and crazier. Okay, so P scale 0.05. So it does have a size, or else these would have been huge spheres anyway. So let's take the P scale that it already had and multiply it by something. So one-dimensional amount we'll multiply it by. Also, before we forget, go to the options. Make sure you turn on the seed attribute to be ID. ID is an attribute it already has because it came from a particle sim. We want it to use the ID to generate the random number from. And as near as I can tell, we'll probably at least want it to be maybe 1/10 of the size. So if I come back here to do 1/10, let's see what that gets us. And then we can give it some randomization perhaps on top of that. Actually, currently it's randomizing from 0 to 1. So let's do 0.8 to... So this is kind of giving it a variance of 0.2. So multiply the P scale, incoming P scale value, times 0.1 to make it 1/10 of the size, and then times another number that is between 0.8 and 1.2. And there you go. So now we have little bubbles, and that's what we want, just a little bit. Whenever we look at these elements here in our render view, always look at the alpha. You might notice me, and maybe I haven't really been saying why I do it, but as an instinct, always check the alpha, because this is how much of it will show up in our composite later. Or even if we had rendered everything at once, it would be the same thing. This is the contribution of this. So even though it's like perfectly, bright grays out here, when we look at the alpha, it will contribute almost none of it, though, to the final picture. So mostly what we'll see show up is these brighter areas. And we need to know that. We can't just rely on a render on a black background. This is what really matters. So try to imagine multiplying this in your head times this. But that's pretty good for the bubbles, I think. We're done with that. So now let's finish up. Let's take a look, at least, at the spray. And we'll preemptively copy these values, or this attribute randomized, to here for the spray as well. I'm going to go to our object world, and let's make a spray, one of these. We've come a long way. Look how much stuff we've set up now. I know it's been over 4 hours, but we've gotten quite a bit done, because there's quite a bit that you need to do, obviously, to make this work, or to actually look like something nice. So we'll change the bubble to spray. And as I've said, we are going to refine this. We're going to run one more sim on the spray to kind of add more smaller particles in there. But for now, let's just see where we're starting from. There you go. And I guess that is that. Oh no, we didn't actually change this to. I was going to say, that looks almost, if I'm not mistaken, exactly like the bubbles. Let's change it to spray, render the spray. And now we'll have somewhere that we're starting from for our next chapter. There we go. So it actually looks pretty nice already, to be honest with you. But we'll make it look even nicer.